SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
We will talk about Intuitionism as a theory, and in our conversation, in our little talk about Intuitionism, we came across this notion of self-evidence. Now, what is self-evidence? We briefly recapitulating what we meant by Intuitionism is that, well, that the moral truths are, there are objective moral truths, and these truths are self-evident. It is definitely not to be understood as being mysteriously intuited by individuals, but that it is self-evident. Now, we will dwell a little bit on this notion of self-evidence. How does this notion of self-evidence make a Intuitionism a sound moral theory, not a mysterious justification for moral truths? Now, what is meant by self-evidence? Well, if you take a look at the slide, the fundamental prima facie principles are known with certainty. Now, if this is to be taken with Ross theory, well, if we quickly recapitulate what Ross meant, that, well, we had Ross proposed a group of prima facie duties, duties that were clearly evident, but how to choose among these duties was the discretion of the agent or of the individual. Now, these duties are self-evident according to Ross, but how do we choose between these duties, or if there is a conflict between duties, or if there is a hierarchy that has to be maintained or brought about, how is that to be done? That has to be done by the agent. Now, moral truths being self-evident, meaning that we have an intuitive, or if I may drop the use of the term for its association with mysterious unscientific thinking, what we mean by this intuitive ability or self-evidence. Let us take an example, and this example is from Plato's dialogue, and Plato postulates, asks a slave of the time, which was supposed to be very low on knowledge, and was perhaps mostly doing manual work, to go from point A to point B, right. Let us take a look at the slide, what briefly was the position. Now, say this is point A and this is point B. Now, the slave was given two options. He takes this is route 1, and he takes this is route 2. Now, which slave is given the task to go from A to B? Which route should he take, 1 or 2? Now, the slave in that dialogue chose the route 1 instead of 2. Now, this goes also this also corroborates the mathematical axiom that two sides of a triangle are together longer than the third side. Now, this is what the Plato tried to show, that, well, this slave who has not been trained in mathematics, arithmetic or geometry of that time still chose the first route, the route which is shorter, thereby indicating that well he does have implicitly the knowledge that well two sides of a triangle are longer than the third side of a triangle. So, that is why he chose a shorter route. Now, this seems to be pretty obvious, and the profundity of this claim can be understood if we look a little deeper. Now, what Plato is trying to prove or demonstrate by this is that well these fundamental truths of geometry of knowledge are there implicitly in the human framework, in the human mind. It is only through education that these are made conscious, that these are made aware consciously. In fact, I am reminded of Vivekananda's quote which said that well education is the manifestation of perfection already present in man. So, well this went ahead to talk about that well knowledge already resides, or we have certain framework for our knowledge in our, we are pre-equipped with it, and this is only made conscious by the process of education. Now, this went ahead further to demarcate two schools of two dominant or major schools of philosophy between rationalism and empiricism, one claiming that well experience is the source of knowledge, empiricism, and rationalism claiming that well most of our knowledge comes as a part of our framework. Now, without getting into that debate, why we talk about this example now is in context of this claim of self evidence. Now, Ross was a ethicist who went ahead to claim that well the self evidence that we talk about, moral truths, comprises in the framework of human mentality. That is, just as the way mathematical truths form a part of what comprises of the human framework, just as we do not question, or it comes into obvious, it is obvious to us that two sides of a triangle are together longer than the third side. Now, this kind of an appeal that such an arithmetic or geometric claim has is the same kind of appeal that a moral claim has. Looking for a justification or an experiential empirical justification for it is futile, or is irrelevant, or is not required to justify this. So, just as mathematics held as one of the purest forms of knowledge, because it is mostly intuitively evident in that sense, not a mysterious sense, that because it is a part of our framework of approaching the world, of the human mentality that needs no further proof, it is self evident, just as the truths of mathematics. If you take a look at what I am trying to say is that just as axioms of mathematics are self evident, so are the moral truths self evident. And this is the claim of Intuitionism. A truth is what it says is that a truth is self evident if understanding it is sufficient for being justified in believing it. One knows the proposition provided one believes it on the basis of understanding it. Such truths are self evident, but that does not mean they are obvious. They are evident to those sufficient mental abilities with mental abilities and experience who have reflected properly about them. Well, what this simply means is that well now these self evident truths that the intuitionists talk about and the mathematicians talk about are not known by everybody. in the sense that it is realized only by those who have reflected or who have grappled with it. So, this axiom that the two sides of a triangle are together longer than the first side, or that a line is the shortest distance between 2 points. Now, these are evident, self evident to the reflecting mind or to the trained mind. So, we have the primitive ability to register this, but it is only with reflection or training or education that that is known to us. So, moral truths in the same sense that, well, we cannot expect that somebody with an unrefined thinking or a primitive way of instinctual thinking will have the same level of knowledge of moral objectivity according to intuitionists as someone with a very refined way of thinking. This happens only when reflection and advanced thinking takes place. So, this is what the intuitionists want to say by self evidence, that this is reflection that takes place only when we find that the agent has reflected upon it, has been trained in it, and has consciously reached the realization of the same. Well, now let us talk about another meta ethical classification that we talked about earlier, which is called ethical non-cognitivism. Now, ethical non-cognitivism claims that ethical judgments do not express, that ethical judgments do not express beliefs or mental states apt to be assessed in terms of truth and falsity. Well, what is meant here? Well, first, what is a proposition? Let us say a proposition is a statement or any sentence that can be assigned a truth value. Now, what makes an ethical proposition? An ethical judgment is a proposition only if it can be assigned the value of truth or falsity. Now, the ethical non-cognitivist says that, well, this is incorrect. So, ethical judgment is not a proposition, and this value of truth and falsehood cannot be assigned to an ethical judgment. Now, let us take a look at two sentences. One, murder is wrong. There were 21 cases of murder reported in city X in year N. Now, can this pay attention on the two sentences written? Now, first is murder is wrong, 2 there were 21 cases of murder reported in city X in year N. Now, can we verify this? Now, how would you judge? Well, can this be true or false? No matter whether it is true or false, how would we perhaps verify it? We would go and check up with the police records and find out that, well, if this is true or not. So, this can be made true or false on verification. But what about sentence 1? Can this be given truth or false value? Now, according to the non-cognitivists, no, this cannot be given the truth value of true or false. So, that means murder is wrong is a value claim, but it is non-cognitive. What is meant by non-cognitive? Non-cognitive. Truth value cannot be assigned. So, now to start with, well, let us look at those two sentences or think about those two sentences again. Now, murder is wrong, why can it not be treated as a moral fact? Well, the non-cognitivists say that, well, any moral judgment is in fact not a judgment, it is perhaps an expression of feeling or whatever it be, it cannot be granted a truth value, because it is a fiction, it is a feeling, it is does not have a correlate to justify it as right and wrong. Well, there are various forms of ethical non-cognitivism. We have emotivism, as we have talked about in the earlier sessions. There is also quasi-realism, prescriptivism. So, these are all forms of ethical non-cognitivism. The third meta-ethical position that we talked about, that, well, moral judgments are cannot be falsified or proved to be true. So, they cannot be a truth value assigned to them. So, this is what ethical non-cognitivism is trying to say. Now, let us take an example of the same sentence that we talked about, that murder is wrong. Now, as we said, murder is wrong, according to the emotivist, is just an expression of one's feeling to or as a reaction to the notion or concept of murder. This is according to the emotivists, and because it is a feeling, not even a belief, there cannot be a true false, cannot be marked true or false. Beliefs can differ, or beliefs may contradict each other. May contradict other beliefs, but feelings are inexplicable and uncontradictable. In the sense that, well, feelings can be can differ from person to person, and there is no way of saying that, well, these feelings contradict each other. The propositions that the feeling hint at may contradict, but feelings that way are not contradictable according to the non-cognitivists, particularly the emotivist version of the non-cognitivist school. So, we see ethical non-cognitivism as a third alternative, which is trying to take away, or which claims that there is no objectivity to moral claims, and moral claims, for whatever purpose, utility they may have, maybe to exhort action, maybe to bring people on one side, but it is merely fictional or psychological, and it is not true. So, we talked about three versions of ethics. We talked about naturalistic ethics, which based ethics on three versions or three meta ethical foundations of ethics. Naturalism, which talked about equating natural properties with ethical properties, and ethical properties were meaningful. Second was non-naturalism or intuitionism, that ethical properties are meaningful, but only they cannot be equated to non-ethical properties, and therefore, the grounding for the ethical properties are on self-evidence or as intuitionists say. The third is the non-cognitivist school, which still hold that well there are ethical judgments, but these judgments are cannot be regarded as true or false, and they are non-cognitive. The balance of it, if one denies even the existence of moral judgments. Now, the non-cognitivists say that there are ethical claims, but these claims cannot be verified, cannot be made true or false, but there is a fourth foundation, which is nihilism or moral nihilism, that claims that well there are no moral judgments, and this belongs to the category of amoralism. So, this is a denial of the very ethical domain that we have talked about. So, this basically sums up three of the meta-ethical foundations in classifying meta-ethics, over which various applied theories have been built. For example, emotivism is built on non-cognitivism, utilitarianism is built on naturalism. So, this is the fundamental meta-ethical positions that come to prescribe these or come to lay the foundation of further moral theories.